Hello everyone, my name is Droogie Forever, and today we are finally back. It took several weeks to get my internet issues resolved, where my upload speed was literally like 0.02 or zero point 0.1 at max. I mean, it was horrible. I couldn't, some websites I couldn't even visit properly. It was a nightmare. It's finally over, and this is going to be a weird video to come back to because we're not actually playing a game. So recently, the Silent Hill 3 novelization was turned into English. We finally have an English translation for the novel, which we've had an English translation for the first two novels for a little while now, I believe. I even have a physical copy of the first novel on my shelf. If I remember, I'll insert it here so you can see it. But yeah, this one finally got an English translation. We have never had an English translation of this. So I'm going to read it. And today we might only do chapter 1 because it's a pretty long book. So yeah, basically I'm going to read a book to you guys today and let you follow along. I hope you enjoy it. This is Silent Hill 3 by Sadamu Yamashita. Chapter 1, Nightmare. I remember being wrapped in a warm embrace, a faint memory, a childhood recollection buried deep in my heart, held in strong arms, swaying with rough breaths blowing in my ear. It felt like breaths full of hopeful vitality, yet also gasps of stifling sorrow. Running while holding you as a baby, my father told me. His eyes gazed into the distance, nostalgic yet lonely. Heather sometimes dreams of that memory. It's usually a good, comforting dream, but sometimes it turns into a horrible nightmare. An unknown presence closes in from behind her running father. Pat, pat, pat. Bare footsteps on the asphalt were heard, an irregular, eerie sound, disrupting the pleasant rhythm of the heartbeat she feels against the warm chest. The shadow of the unknown presence that catches up with them looms over the father and child, turning into darkness that devours the world. Glowing yellow eyes, like a cloudy full moon, float in the darkness, accompanied by a twisted smile glaring at young Heather. A chilling gaze piercing into Heather's body, cutting her apart. The pain inflicted was not only physical, but also a soul-wrenching agony that drove her to madness, and a scream burst from her lips. Normally, she would wake up from such nightmares, drenched in sweat and sitting up in bed, but today's nightmare did not end there. Where am I? Heather muttered in confusion, looking around. Just when she thought the massive shadow had caught up with her, the dream took a sudden turn, and she found herself in a place that seemed like a plaza. She was standing on her own feet, no longer a baby, but as her current 17-year-old self. Is this an amusement park? Though darkness had fallen, it wasn't pitch black, as faint light from scattered street lamps diluted the gloom. Looking back, she saw colorful neon lights blending into the night mist, and an illuminated archway indicating the amusement park entrance. The gate was barred by iron grills, preventing entry or exit, but Heather was already inside, trapped, with no means of escape. She felt a cold sensation in the palm of her hand. She was holding a knife, a switchblade, an unfamiliar object to her, and certainly not something she habitually carried for self-defense. But since this was a dream, there was no need to ponder why. Yet the sensation was vivid. The hard, icy steel was almost real. Heather noticed a figure sitting on a bench in the plaza. Was it the terrible presence that had been chasing her as a child? Nervously, she gripped the knife and cautiously approached. Though she moved stealthily, a metallic clatter echoed from the soles of her boots. Part of the plaza's brick pavement was covered with a mesh grid, possibly a drainage cover. As she neared the bench, a light separate from the street lamps illuminated the figure. The flickering light came from Heather's chest. Somehow, in the dream's absurdity, a pocket flashlight had been placed in the chest pocket of her down jacket. The light revealed a person with unusually large ears protruding from their head. Leaning weakly against the bench back, they had wide, open, round eyes. A rabbit doll, or rather, a costume. It seemed abandoned, or perhaps someone was still inside it. The fluffy face that once greeted visiting children was now stained with dark, dried blood. Heather left the bench and ventured further into the amusement park. She wandered aimlessly through the surreal landscape, passing by a popcorn stand and a mysterious cage-like box the size of a phone booth. She glimpsed to see something wriggling through the gaps in the wire mesh. It didn't seem to be human, but rather some inhuman entity. Curious, but not enough to wanted to inspect closely. That's wrong. Curious, but not enough to want to inspect closely, I would imagine is what they meant to put there. Heather decided to ignore it and walked past. A brick wall blocked her path. The second gate. When she pushed the door, it opened effortlessly. The eerie whirring noise of nocturnal park creatures filled the air, replacing the lively sounds of visitors. The floor was entirely made of metal mesh. Each step she took produced a grating noise, which seemed to attract something from the darkness. A dog. A monster resembling a dog. Its head was split in two, as if cleaved by an axe. Drool dripped from the split head, exposing fangs, brimming with hostility towards Heather. Heather ran. Compared to her female friends, she was tomboyish, known for her strong-willed nature, never flinching even in fights against boys, but still, she was a 17-year-old girl. She hated cockroaches and rats, and the grotesque appearance of the monster made her hair stand on end. Her fleeing legs felt like the soles of her boots were glued to the ground. The nightmare's characteristic sluggish movements. The dog-like monster caught up, sinking its teeth into Heather's skirt. "Stop it!" Heather swung the switchblade wildly in defense. She felt no resistance as she stabbed. The monster's body felt like air. No matter how much she stabbed, her knife passed through. Yet the weight pulling on her skirt was real. The stench from the bared teeth was nauseating. Somehow, in the ambiguity of the dream, Heather found herself running along a corridor with an open center, dragging her bleeding leg, wounded from a bite. She dashed past restaurants and souvenir shops lining the hall, ignoring them completely until another brick wall blocked her path. She fled through a door marked Mountain Coaster. Though she escaped the dog-like monster, the situation worsened. Beyond the new door, the eerie whirring grew louder, echoing from all around. In the darkness, a massive silhouette loomed ahead. The light revealed a grotesque giant with an oddly shaped head and sack-like thick arms. The giant lumbered forward, dragging its heavy arms that reached the ground. Heather stood frozen, paralyzed by otherworldly terror. The impossible appearance of the monster was more horrifying than the dog-like creature. Her heart screamed in place of her mouth. She had to run. Taking a wide detour around the monster, she sprinted deeper inside. Fortunately, the giant's movements were slow due to its massive size, yet she fell into another nightmare trap. The air felt sticky like syrup, resisting her every move. The monster's thick arms struck her back, propelling her forward. Though it was a dream, and she felt no pain, she could only awkwardly get up. The bruises on her body felt all too real. She staggered onward. Beyond a yellow ticket booth was a barred fence, and beyond that she saw stairs, probably leading to the roller coaster platform. With no other refuge in sight, she pushed through the gate and headed there. The lifelessly still roller coaster had no passengers, and the control room at the top of the stairs was dark. Continuing forward meant walking along the winding tracks of the mountain coaster. Her nightmare urged her to continue and proceed forward on this path. She walked along the tracks, many of the sleepers missing. Had this been reality, and in broad daylight, she would be paralyzed from the height and danger, unable to take another step, proving itself to be a perilous place. A high-pitched whistle sounded from behind. Vibrations traveled through the tracks. A deafening roar penetrated her ears. Heather turned around in suspicion, only to see the roller coaster train, which should have been stationary, was now charging towards her. The train's lights pierced the darkness, blinding her and burning into her widened, astonished eyes. Her vision went completely white, and in the next moment, she felt her body crushed flat. It felt like a ridiculous cartoon character. Her body, flung into the night sky, fluttered down like a leaf in the wind, falling beneath the tracks. Shattered bones, exposed organs, blood-soaked skin. This is a dream. It must be a dream, but what is this awful feeling? Her heart felt heavy, a despair so deep it made her want to cry. It was as if it were real. Something is touching me, trying to revive me from the dead. A hand of salvation, but not one of love. A forceful pull from the grave. Heather barely opened her eyes to see who it was. A guardian angel? No way. Don't make me laugh. Though it had a human form, it was a dried up, wrinkled monster. No, don't touch me with those filthy hands. I just want to sleep, to forget everything. I don't want to remember. Heather awoke groggily. It seemed she had dozed off in the pleasant afternoon sunlight. Sprawled lazily on a table at the hamburger shop she had stopped at on her way back from shopping. What a horrible dream, she murmured wearily. The nightmare had left her feeling utterly drained. The sunlight spilling through the blinds of the hamburger shop's window was tinged with the red of evening. It looked like the color of blood from her dream. Heather lifted her heavy body and left the shop. Families with children, couples, singles, women dressed in the latest fashions, men in business suits, young people covered in tattoos and piercings, the wealthy obese and the gracefully retired elderly, all these corrupt and decadent individuals were swarming. The shops overflowed with items, enticing fleeting pleasures, reminiscent of the decadence of Sodom and Gomorrah, with people drowning in wealth. Amidst this bustling crowd, a woman dressed entirely in black was walking. Defying the flow of shoppers in the mall, her nun-like attire made her stand out from the vibrant surroundings, her gaze filled with pity as she regarded the world with disdain. Very soon, the woman murmured, a new era will dawn. A faint smile. The signs were already showing. On the flip side of this seemingly unchanged city, it lay in wait, biding its time to emerge. From the other side, separated by a thin veil, it waited for the right moment to surge through. The trigger had already been pulled. The bullet would soon pierce through the thin membrane, and before long it would start to spill out. The woman's gaze eventually settled on a girl. Her look was intense, almost loving. The girl standing in front of a public phone. The girl who had become the catalyst, the one who had pierced the veil. Everything resided within her. Dad, it's me, Heather spoke rapidly into the public phone. Sorry for not calling you sooner. I fell asleep. I'm heading home now. Oh, the thing you asked for, they didn't have it. Yeah, I know. I love you too. Two pairs of eyes were secretly watching her as she called home. One belonged to a man. The man observed the girl's profile from a slight distance, comparing it with a photo in his hand, and nodded to himself. Heather Mason. It's definitely her. Heather noticed the man's gaze. He was a middle-aged man in a worn-out suit and coat, with an unkempt beard and messy hair sticking out from under a felt hat, looking like he was on the verge of homelessness. As she hung up the receiver, Heather shot a hostile glare back at him. If an unknown man was staring at her intently, his motives were clear, especially since he appeared to be around her father's age. His twisted intentions were obvious. Get lost, you creep. Heather's glare conveyed her message, and the man showed signs of confusion. He looked like a scolded child hastily shaking his head. Wait, you're Heather Mason, right? I need to talk to you. He pursued her as she turned to leave. My name is Douglas Cartland. I'm not a suspicious person. I'm a detective. A detective? Heather turned back, surprised to hear her name called. Yes. The man Douglas produced an ID. It was a license issued by the state government. Huh. Heather looked at the ID with interest for the first time, but she felt no curiosity about the detective himself. She couldn't determine if it was a real license. There were plenty of forged IDs in the world. For all she knew, he could be a criminal pretending to be someone else to make her drop her guard. Even if he was a real detective, she had no intention of divulging private information about any acquaintances who might be the subject of his investigation. If you're looking for a lost pet, ask someone else. Goodbye. Just a moment, please, hear me out. My daddy told me not to go with strangers, even if they offer me candy. This is very important. It's about your birth. Persistent man. Heather was fed up. How far are you planning to follow me? She hurried to the restroom in the mall, glaring at the man with the women-only door behind her. Oh, my apologies. Douglas stepped back, almost stumbling. I got carried away. I'll wait here, but please, we really need to talk. Slam. The door closed in the detective's face. Heather entered the restroom without sparing a glance at the stalls. Her goal was to shake off the man trailing her, not to use the facilities. She headed straight for the window, intending to escape through it. However, she paused, staring at something. There was graffiti on the mirror above the sinks, a strange symbol enclosed in a circle. It looked like it was drawn with lipstick, but had the eerie appearance of dried blood. This mall has really gone downhill, Heather sighed. It used to be a decent place, but now there are perverts lurking around, and even the restrooms aren't safe from vandalism. As she stared at the graffiti, she felt a wave of dizziness. Her temples throbbed. Memories seemed to leak out from deep within her mind. The symbol in the mirror looked familiar. Where had she seen it? When? The more she tried to remember, the worse her headache became. Heather averted her gaze, desperate to escape the pain. Now was not the time for this. She needed to get away from the pervert first. She had to report him to security and have him arrested. Opening the window, she climbed out, dropping into the alley between the mall and an adjacent building. Heading toward the main entrance, she found the alley blocked by a van parked with its rear end protruding, taking up the entire width of the alley. Forced to make a detour, she found her path further blocked by a stack of empty boxes. Heather was infuriated. She couldn't believe the negligence. This was supposed to be an emergency exit. What if there was a fire? It was no wonder the mall's clientele had deteriorated with such poor management. She had no choice but to go back inside through the emergency exit. Though there was a chance she might run into the self-proclaimed detective again, she figured it was unlikely since the restroom was far from where she re-entered. As she opened the emergency door, a damp, musty air seemed to lick her face. There was a faint but unpleasant smell, and she wrinkled her nose in disgust. What was wrong? Was the air conditioning broken? Another odd thing. It was eerily quiet. She couldn't hear the usual cacophony of shoppers. It was too early for the mall to be closing. The sound of her boots on the floor, usually a brisk, confident noise, now echoed forlornly in the corridor. When she reached the end of the emergency hallway and pushed open the door to the main shopping area, her fear became definitive. There was no one, not a single soul, no shoppers, no employees. The main lights were off, leaving only the dim emergency lighting. The once spotless floor was now stained with what looked disturbingly like blood. It was as if a massacre had taken place. Both passages leading to the main entrance were sealed with fire shutters. She was trapped. "What's going on?" Heather's voice was nearly a scream. The dread swirling in her chest wasn't because of the fear of running into the middle-aged man again. It was the strange, echoing moans emanating from somewhere deep below that filled her with terror. Her legs trembled, but she summoned the courage to continue through the deserted mall. She had to get out of there no matter what. As she passed a boutique, she noticed a figure crouched inside, visible through the display window. Perhaps someone had been left behind, hiding from whatever had happened. She pushed open the door to the boutique, ready to help if the person was injured and unable to move. They might know what had occurred. Inside, the first thing she noticed was a handgun lying on the floor. An automatic type, not something one would expect in a boutique. Perhaps a security guard had dropped it. Heather picked it up, checking that it was loaded. The feeling of having a weapon eased her anxiety. She had subconsciously wished for something to protect herself, which might explain why she had spotted the gun so quickly. A pained moan. The sound of something tearing. Heather turned toward the noise. In the back of the store, under the counter, something large and misshapen was huddled over something else. A massive body with a strangely shaped head and thick bag-like arms. It looked like a creature straight out of her subconscious, something she had seen in a nightmare at an amusement park. She couldn't tell what the creature was attacking. The mangled, bloody mess it was tearing into was unrecognizable as human. Heather could only hope it wasn't. The creature turned its bizarre head toward her, its eyes, wherever they were, seeming to fix on her with a fierce gaze. The monster rose, its immense form nearly touching the high ceiling. From the ends of its thick arms extended claws that had likely been used to rend its victim to pieces. Heather was paralyzed with fear, feeling like a frog under the gaze of a snake. Sweat poured from her pores as her body alternated between hot and cold. Her legs barely supported her. Running seemed pointless. The monster would catch her. Facing it with the gun seemed like her best option. "Stay back," Heather shouted, trying to sound tough. But it was a monster. It probably didn't even understand human language. Even if it did, it wouldn't listen. It was a bloodthirsty beast. The monster advanced, and Heather fired. It wasn't her first time handling a weapon. Her father had taken her to shooting ranges a few times. He had praised her skills. She had experience with pistols, rifles, and shotguns. While teaching his daughter to shoot might have seemed eccentric, her father had done it out of concern for her safety. His eyes had always held a mix of conviction, love, and a touch of sadness. It might be unnecessary training, but in this crime-ridden world, this could come in handy someday, her father Harry had told her. His wish hadn't come true, but the training had proven invaluable. "I said stay back," she screamed, her voice high-pitched, and fired repeatedly at the grotesque enemy. The force of the bullets made the massive creature recoil. When Heather exhausted the magazine, the monster toppled forward, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. It twitched grotesquely before finally lying still. Heather felt no elation or sense of achievement. She was still petrified, tears welling in her eyes like the 17-year-old girl she was. "Why is this happening?" she muttered. Why was a monster from her nightmare here in reality? The shock and confusion made her head spin. It was too absurd to accept. She kept staring, but the creature was undeniably the one from her dreams. Why? She racked her brain, scratching her head in frustration. "Enough!" she exclaimed. There was no point in dwelling on it. She wouldn't find an answer by pondering. It wasn't in her nature to brood. With tears still in her eyes, Heather angrily kicked the fallen monster and shifted her gaze to the mangled remains of its victim. The pieces of flesh scattered on the floor were barely recognizable, but the presence of a shredded belt among them indicated that it had once been human. She stifled a wave of nausea and silently prayed for the soul of the deceased. The torn belt had a spare magazine attached to it, marking the victim as a security guard. He had been caught off guard and attacked before he could even fire his weapon. Heather grimaced as she picked up the gun belt. She loaded one of the magazines into the handgun and stuffed the rest into the pockets of her down jacket. The unsettling moans she had heard suggested there were more monsters around. She needed to be prepared. Heather retraced her steps to the emergency corridor. This area was usually restricted to mall employees and housed various storerooms, offices, and utility rooms. She intended to head upstairs via the emergency stairs, then come back down to the first floor using the escalator and make her way to the main entrance. She dashed up the stairs and opened the door on the second floor landing, entering another restricted area. The moaning was louder here, and the sound of footsteps approached from the right fork in the hallway. Another nightmare creature had heard the door open and was coming closer. This time it was a dog-like beast with a grotesquely split jaw and dripping saliva, a nightmare she had faced before in a dream. Beyond it, another strange creature with long legs and pale skin that hadn't been in her dream also appeared. But now, Heather had a weapon. Having experienced combat once already, she felt less scared and more resolute. She fired at the dog-like beast before it could leap at her. 4 bullets hit their marks. Thanks to her childhood training, only the first shot missed. The hairless creature collapsed in a pool of foul-smelling blood, its sharp teeth visible in its gaping maw, reminding her of a shark's deadly grin. As more creatures emerged from the hallway, Heather's face went pale. No way! She couldn't fight off this many with just a handgun. She turned and sprinted down the left hallway, heading towards the door leading to the hall. The second-floor hall had a circular atrium surrounded by balconies that extended up to the third floor. When Heather reached the hall, she saw 2 more of the large armed monsters roaming about. She hid behind a column and checked her pockets for the remaining magazines. She had 2 left, which meant she had 25 bullets in total. It seemed like a lot, but it wasn't enough. She estimated that it would take a full magazine to take down one of the large monsters based on her previous encounter. That meant 2 magazines for the 2 in front of her, leaving only 5 bullets for any other creatures she might encounter. No more wasting bullets, she resolved. It was a lesson her father Harry had often tried to instill in her, and it seemed she might finally take it to heart. From her hiding spot, Heather observed the sluggish movements of the massive creatures. They had been slow in her dream as well. She had managed to slip past them at the amusement park, and she believed she could do it again now. Heather targeted one of the patrolling monsters on the balcony and waited for it to turn its back. The moment it did, she darted from behind the column, aiming to squeeze through the narrow gap between the monster's arm and the railing, then make a dash for the escalator. However, the monster reacted faster than she anticipated. While its legs were slow, its arms moved with surprising speed, blocking her path with its elongated limb. "Ah!" Heather gasped, stopping just in time to avoid impaling herself on the blade at the end of the monster's arm. It was a narrow escape. Her intended route was now blocked. She had no choice but to turn around. But the hallway leading to the elevator was also sealed off by a fire shutter. The monster fully blocked the balcony, advancing with its gleaming blades. To make matters worse, the other monster had noticed the commotion and was lumbering towards her from behind. Heather was trapped. Her only option was the nearby bookstore. She dashed inside, knowing the monsters would likely follow, but it was better than facing both at once in the open. The bookstore was filled with rows of bookshelves packed with hardcovers and paperbacks. Heather sprinted past a shelf of Shakespeare's collected works and headed towards the register at the back. She spotted a door that looked like a back exit. It might lead to the escalator. Ignoring the sound of the monsters shattering the store's display window, she pushed through the door and disappeared from the bookstore. The woman stood in the mall corridor waiting. Dressed in black from head to toe, her austere and expressionless demeanor resembled that of a nun in a secluded monastery. Yet her eyes sparkled with joy. The transformation had exceeded her expectations. Finally. She didn't say it out loud, but the words echoed in her mind. Finally it has begun, the dawn of a new era, the awakening from a long slumber. However, she knew the sun had not yet risen. The horizon was just starting to show the faintest hint of white amidst the night's darkness. To make this dawn a reality, to usher in the new era, she knew she must. The woman smiled inwardly and waited, ready. Upon exiting through the back door, Heather found herself in another emergency corridor. The door leading to the escalator was closed, and every door along the corridor was locked. The doors were sealed shut, leaving her with no option but to return to the area where the hulking monster awaited. Listen, Heather, her father Harry had repeatedly taught her. No matter what kind of hardships you face, never give up. If you keep moving forward, a way will open up to you. You have that power. You have a strong heart within you. Believe in yourself until the end. I know, Dad, Heather said, imagining Harry's figure in her mind. I won't lose. This is nothing. I'll definitely make it home. It might take me a little while, but don't eat dinner alone without me, okay? Startled, she raised her gun. In the dim corridor ahead there was someone. The figure seemed human but was entirely black, making it hard to tell. Another monster? Heather cautiously advanced, gun pointed forward. Gradually, she made out that the figure was a human woman dressed in black from head to toe like a nun. She stood motionless, silent, and expressionless, staring at Heather. Heather called out. Who are you? Are you someone who got left behind? What happened here? What are those monsters? Please tell me. I have no idea what's going on. There's no one else around, and you're the first person I've met. Bombarded with rapid-fire questions, the woman finally seemed inclined to respond. However, the words that emerged from her mouth were incomprehensible. The beginning is upon us, to reclaim our lost paradise. What are you talking about? Heather frowned. She wondered if the woman might be insane. It would be understandable in such an unbelievable situation with monsters running rampant. Or perhaps she had always been odd, one of those people who preach the end of the world and urge repentance. Despite her expressionless face, the woman's eyes gleamed with life. Don't you know we need your power, she said, staring at Heather with eyes filled with rapture. Heather shrugged. I don't get it. Sorry, but I don't think I can help you. It was better not to get involved. In such a situation, having her around would only be a hindrance. It was painful to leave her behind, but it was a case of, I don't know that word, Carneades board. When two people are drowning and there's only one board that can support them, one must let the other go to save themselves. She had to prioritize her own safety and escape, then notify the police to send a rescue team. I am Claudia, the woman continued. Was she introducing herself now? Okay, Heather nodded. I'll remember her. I'll definitely send help, so just stay here and wait. As Heather tried to move past her, the woman stood in her way. Remember, she whispered, her voice soft but sharp. Remember me and your true self as well, and what you must do. Throb. Heather's temple began to throb painfully. Thou whose hands shall be stained with blood shall invite the paradise. Throb. Triggered by the woman's words, Heather felt a sudden headache, dizziness. In her blurred vision, the woman's eyes shone unnaturally bright. Hypnotized? Heather felt suspicion towards the woman. Did you do something to them all? All is the work of God, the woman replied with a faint smile. A sharp pain pierced Heather's head. Wait, she shouted at the woman's retreating back. The pain was unbearable. She tried to follow, but the dizziness forced her to her knees. Was it anemia? Her vision blurred white. By the time her breath steadied and she felt better, the woman was gone. What am I supposed to remember? Heather murmured in a daze. What is it that I... The answer felt like it was on the tip of her tongue, but trying to express it brought back the headache. Her mind resisted. Where could that woman, Claudia, have disappeared to? Heather began checking each door along the corridor. There had to be one that wasn't locked. Claudia must have taken a route through one of these rooms to get down to the first floor. After a series of disappointments, Heather reached the end of the corridor. There was an elevator, a service one. This is it, she muttered. When she pressed the button, The doors opened, almost inviting her in. The ease of it all made her feel a bit foolish. All the struggles she'd endured seemed pointless now, if only she had found it sooner. As soon as Heather got inside and the elevator began to move, she was startled. She had felt secure inside this metal box, thinking it would protect her from outside threats, but suddenly something fell from the ceiling with a noise. A portable pocket radio tumbled onto the floor. Heather aimed her gun at the ceiling, looking up to see the emergency hatch open. It must have been open from the start. For some unknown reason, the radio that had been placed on the edge of the hatch slipped and fell due to the elevator's vibrations. The fall had turned it on. White noise was hissing from the radio. Heather picked it up and turned the tuning dial. Given the gravity of the situation, she hoped to catch some news about the shopping mall, but the radio seemed broken, emitting nothing but irritating static. "You stupid, useless thing!" Heather almost threw it against the floor in frustration, but held back. Suddenly she recalled her father's words. When she was a child, her father, a writer, used to tell her his own whimsical fairy tales as a substitute for campfire ghost stories. Once upon a time, there was a broken radio. The radio only made a hissing sound. It couldn't even play the weather forecast. Moreover, it was very scarred. It hated demons and would start crying. Oh, scared, sorry. I thought they meant scarred, but now that I read the next sentence, I realize it's scared. Okay. Moreover, it was very scared. It hated demons and would start crying. Scary, hiss, hiss, terrifying cries. A man-eating demon is nearby. Leaving the white noise on, Heather stuffed the radio into her jacket pocket. It felt like her father, Harry, was giving her advice. He never spoke much about his past, but it seemed like his fairy tales were modeled on his own experiences. The resemblance was uncanny between his tales and her current situation. Could her combat training have been prepared for this very day? The elevator doors opened, revealing a dark void. Something is wrong. Heather frowned. The floor indicator still showed the second floor. She was sure she had descended. Cautiously, she stepped out of the elevator. She immediately found herself at a dead end, surrounded on three sides by wire mesh walls. Another elevator. The radio in her pocket grew louder. Something was on the other side of the mesh. It clung to the wall, a shriveled, writhing figure, unidentifiable and disturbing. "No!" Heather recoiled. "This is a dream, right? It has to be a dream." She forced a strained laugh. Even a kid wouldn't believe this. Suddenly, the rusted door behind her slammed shut, trapping her in the wire mesh elevator. She could no longer return to the bright elevator she had entered. Wake up from this nightmare already. She wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, that she had fallen asleep at the hamburger shop. The mummified figure on the other side of the mesh looked like a monster from an amusement park, a creature she had seen in a cage near the entrance. It was absurd for something from her nightmares to appear in reality, but Heather knew better. This wasn't a dream. It was undeniably real. The mummified creature arched its body away from the wall, staring at her through the mesh. Heather wanted to look away, but the creature might break through the mesh and attack, so she kept her eyes on it, unable to blink. As she stared, she felt the creature seemed less hostile. Despite its wrinkled, featureless face, it almost seemed to be smiling. She felt an odd sense of familiarity, not just near the amusement park entrance, somewhere else too. A sudden jolt interrupted her thoughts. The mummified figure vanished upward. The elevator moved briefly before stopping and opening its doors. Another dark space awaited. It wasn't pitch black. Faint light reflected off surfaces, slightly alleviating the darkness. Before her eyes adjusted, Heather heard unsettling footsteps. The radio noise intensified, followed by a savage growl. Instinctively, she fired her gun. The blind shots hit their mark, and a creature let out a yelp. Collapsing, squinting, she saw it was a monstrous rabid dog. As the creature died, the radio's white noise subsided, just as her father's story described. For some unknown reason, the radio seemed to warn of approaching monsters. Heather felt her way along the wall, probably this way. She wanted to get out quickly. It felt like she had wandered into a hellish underworld and she was suffocating in it. "Sharpen your senses, Heather." Her father Harry's words came back to her. "Don't rely solely on your ears. Beasts move quietly. Sense their presence." During a summer camping trip, her father had made young Heather walk alone through a dark forest without a flashlight as a test of courage. "Watch out, there are bears and coyotes." The warning seemed cruel, scaring Heather out of her wits. Every little noise startled her, and she walked on, desperately holding back tears. The short trail felt like an endless march. She didn't cry because she trusted her father. He would always be watching over her, and he was keeping a close distance. The stories about bears and coyotes were lies. When she finally completed the task, Harry cried more than she did, hugging her and begging for forgiveness. The sensations from those dark forest walks returned to Heather. Her senses sharpened like radar. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she could move without relying on the wall. Was her father training her for this very day? Did he foresee all of this? Who was he? And who am I? What did that woman in black mean by her words? Heather's mind swirled with confusion and chaos. Amid the locked doors in the corridor, she finally found one that wasn't. Opening it, she realized she was in a wide passageway, probably the main street of the shopping mall. If so, the main entrance was close, but the sense of evil dampened her joy. The radio's white noise intensified, revealing a large, hulking silhouette in the darkness, another monster with thick arms. Heather tried to dash towards the presumed main entrance, but two more monsters blocked her path. She couldn't get through. A clawed arm swung down at her, and Heather narrowly dodged, moving away from the door she had exited, cutting off her retreat. Fine. If I can't go back, I'll find another way out. She sprinted in the opposite direction. There was just enough space beside the monsters. For now, she needed to shake them off. She slipped past the sluggish creatures and ran deeper into the main street. Unfortunately, a fire shutter was down. Fuck! I couldn't see it in the dark. Heather cursed and turned back. She remembered a side passage near the monsters. She had no choice but to try it, hoping it led to an escape route. The monster turned, dragging its thick arm, closing in. Heather fired her gun, wasting a magazine, but she had no choice. The monster fell, and she stepped over it, rushing into the side passage. After a straight run and a right turn, she found a room with light seeping through a door crack. It felt like a beacon of hope. Someone might be there. Driven by a longing for human contact, Heather entered the room. It was a storeroom. Shelves lined the walls, but they were empty and dusty. There was only one item, a pocket flashlight, which was the source of the light. Heather grabbed it without hesitation. It was a strong light for a small flashlight, reliable but unsettlingly similar to one she had seen in her nightmares. Maybe it made sense if this was a continuation of those dreams, but knowing it wasn't a dream made it eerie. This was a reality worse than any nightmare. A nightmare ends when you wake up. Even if it ends tragically, waking up ensures safety. Would there be an end to this reality? Could she return home safely? She left the storeroom and continued down the corridor, reaching another main street. Shining the light down the dark passage, she recognized it. This was where she had entered after leaving the emergency exit and passing through the emergency route initially. But it seemed as if many years had passed. The street and the stores lining it looked dilapidated. The tiles were faded, cracked, and peeling. The store windows were dirty, cracked, or shattered. It was as if the world had changed dramatically. Heather entered a store, the boutique where she had first encountered a monster. Inside was a ruin. The floor was corroded and blackened. The walls yellowed. The many dresses were gone, as was the monster's body. Only empty hangers remained. Leaving the store, Heather pondered what to do. The fire shutter still blocked access to the hall, and the emergency route door was closed. She had to turn back. Retracing her steps, she aimed for the main entrance. What the hell is going on? Heather was in shock. After risking everything to reach the front entrance, the door refused to budge. Whether she pushed or pulled, it remained firmly closed. Through the glass, the outside had already fallen into deep twilight. It was as if the entrance door was buried under the darkness descending from the sky. Two bulky monsters were chasing Heather. She looked up at the escalator, but a fire shutter, illuminated by the light, blocked her way to the second floor. Feeling desperate, Heather charged at the monsters. It wasn't that she had chosen death out of despair. Just before the entrance, there was a hamburger shop. Unlike the entrance door that repelled bullets with reinforced glass, the shop's glass door could be shot open for escape. The monsters would follow, but there was surely a back door in the store, just like in the bookstore in the mall. Right before the monsters caught up with her, Heather reached the front of the hamburger shop. She didn't have time to aim her gun at the glass door, narrowly dodging a heavy blow from the monster's arm. She collided with the glass door shoulder first and tumbled inside the shop. It was a stroke of luck. The glass door was unlocked, but it seemed she had used up all her luck. The back door wouldn't open. It budged slightly, but was blocked by some delivery goods outside. She was trapped. The two monsters struggled to enter the narrow doorway, but it was only a matter of time. Her lifeline, a handgun, had only one magazine and 5 bullets left. Don't panic, no matter what situation you're in, her father Harry had taught her. Analyze the situation calmly, observe your surroundings, and look for anything you can use. Heather glanced around the shop. It was vastly different from the place where she had been dozing off earlier. She looked for bullets or any makeshift weapon, but this was a place meant for enjoying meals, not for storing weapons. Suddenly, she noticed something hanging from the ceiling, a partially lowered ladder. A loft? Even if it was a dead end up there, at least she could escape from the monsters. Heather climbed onto a table and jumped. Just a little bit more, but she couldn't even reach the tips of her fingers. Something to hook onto. There it is. She took a folded wire from her down jack pocket. She had taken it from a boutique. It was meant for picking the lock of the main entrance if it was locked. She had no lock-picking skills, but planned to jam the wire into the keyhole and jiggle it around if necessary. Her father Harry's teaching was try everything no matter what. Fortunately, she hadn't had time to try the main entrance lock due to the monsters, but now it was proving useful in an unexpected way. She straightened the wire and bent the tip onto a hook. It was long enough without jumping. Waving goodbye to the monsters, she climbed up the ladder. At the top was not a loft, but a second-floor passage. The ladder was actually an emergency ladder meant for descending from the second floor. The construction of the shopping mall itself seemed warped in an impossible way. Given the abnormal situation with monsters prowling, Heather thought even time and space might be distorted. The second floor was a place she had passed through earlier. If she proceeded to the atrium, she would likely encounter the burly monsters waiting for her again, but she had no choice but to go. The interior of the shopping mall had undergone significant changes. Perhaps she could now access places that were previously unreachable. The fire shutter on the escalator leading to the third floor was not down, but Heather didn't ascend. She didn't want to go to the third floor. She wanted to go down to the first floor. As she continued on, she passed in front of an electronics store. She heard white noise and tensed up. It wasn't coming from her pocket radio. A television displayed in the store window was on, broadcasting a noisy, static screen. Heather was drawn to it. Why was this television the only one working in the ruins of the shopping mall? Amidst the gray static, something appeared. Heather squinted to see a human face? A child. A girl, it seemed. "Daddy," the girl said. She had a pained expression. Heather stared intently. She recognized the girl. Although the face soon disappeared into the static, Heather couldn't take her eyes off the television screen. Where had she seen her before? She tried to remember, but staring too long made her dizzy. The static hurt her eyes. Her head throbbed. It was the same state she was in when she encountered Claudia. Heather moved away from the television. She felt extremely uncomfortable. It wasn't just that she felt unwell, she felt oddly irritated. And anger was resurfacing, an indescribable emotion. Why? This is very important. It's about your birth. The man who called himself a detective, Douglas, had said that. A secret. My past. Tell me, Dad, Heather thought, biting her lip. You know, don't you? You know everything. Who am I? Lost in a labyrinth, her heart ensnared in its twists and turns, Heather began to walk again, determined to find an exit. After wandering around endlessly, she had no choice but to go back to square one. Heather slumped her shoulders in dismay. Despite having explored every corner of the second floor, she hadn't found any stairs or ladders leading down to the first floor. She had risked her life evading the monsters, and now she was utterly exhausted. The only saving grace was that she managed to replenish her ammunition from the ruins of what seemed to be a gun shop. Otherwise, she would have already been devoured by the monsters, her 17-year-old body completely consumed. With her last shred of hope, Heather dragged her weary feet up the stopped escalator to the third floor. The main street leading to the atrium on the third floor was also blocked. At first glance, Heather felt a hysterical urge to scream, but upon closer inspection, she noticed what appeared to be a door in the middle of the obstruction. It was a bizarre structure. Was it exposed concrete? No, it looked more like a boulder had been cut out and placed there. She had a premonition. This is the end and the beginning. The sealed door would lead to the revelation of her secret. Heather pushed the door. She found a ladder on the opposite side of the atrium after making her way around the third floor corridor. With a sinking feeling, she descended into the dark void, eventually reaching the bottom. What should have been the first floor atrium was now a barren space with the floor laid bare, as if the foundation of the building was exposed. The foundation that had once delighted shoppers was gone. All the surrounding stores had collapsed. Not just the shop windows, but even the walls were gone, leaving empty voids. It felt like a coliseum where demons from hell might battle. Yes, it was indeed an arena, a stage set for her to face death. A roar echoed, and something massive came charging from the depths of the void with a ground-shaking rumble. Heather shuddered at the sight of the creature. It was far larger than the monsters with thick arms she had encountered before. It resembled an enormous bloated worm. Its slick, shiny exterior looked tough and thick. With trembling fingers, Heather fired her gun. The bullets were effortlessly deflected, and the worm-like creature remained unshaken. But then it exploded with rage, baring its fangs. Its head split open, revealing a gaping maw in the center, lined with rotten, drooling flesh. Compared to this, the previous monster seemed almost cute. Heather desperately fled from the creature's massive, tree-like attacks. If she were caught, she wouldn't just be pinned down, she'd be crushed. If she was lucky, she'd die quickly, but more likely she'd be devoured, feeling the agony of being chewed up by the creature's unnaturally large teeth. The monster, having missed its chance to eat Heather, continued its charge and disappeared into the void on the other side of the hall. Heather's momentary relief was short-lived as the creature reappeared through another void, roaring and baring its fangs again. Heather felt a sense of déjà vu. Her father's face flashed in her mind, sitting by her bed reading a book to her as she drifted off to sleep. The story he read that night was The Traveler and the Lizard, a fairy tale. His reading had been so poignant that it left a deep impression on young Heather. When the traveler with the bow and arrow heard this, he said, "Then I shall defeat the lizard." The traveler did not attack the lizard right away. Instead, he insulted it. What a pathetic lizard, not scary at all. The lizard got angry. "I'll swallow you whole." The lizard lunged at the traveler with its mouth wide open. The traveler had been waiting for this. Calmly, he notched an arrow and shot it into the lizard's open mouth, where there were no hard scales, and pierced its stomach. The lizard fell over and died. Heather laughed at the absurdity of it all. A lizard and a worm couldn't be more different, yet they were so similar. It was as if the worm was mimicking the lizard. It was like a scene out of a fairy tale. Her laughter froze. A question surfaced, and she could no longer laugh. Who was mimicking whom? The worm, or... Her expression turned serious, and she aimed at the worm's massive open mouth. She was certain that was its weak point. She was unshakably certain, because it was mimicking the lizard, and the one who made it mimic was... Her bullet pierced the soft flesh inside the mouth. The worm let out a pathetic scream, so different from its previous roars. Instead of closing its mouth to protect itself, the creature, with its limited intelligence, responded to the pain by opening its mouth wider and crying out. Heather fired repeatedly. She showed no mercy, emptying the entire magazine into it. The monster's screams ceased. Its mouth closed like a wilting flower. Its head slumped to the floor, and it moved no more. There was no applause in the arena where the battle had ended. Silence melted into the darkness, and the darkness itself disappeared somewhere. What the? Heather widened her eyes and looked around. The hall had returned to its former state. What had been a desolate, ruinous space moments ago was now a pristine floor with clean tiles, a fountain majestically sitting in the center, and shops lining the urban shopping mall. Am I back? From the nightmare? Back to reality? Was everything until now just a dream? Was I dreaming? However, the gun that had endured the hardships with her was still gripped in her hand. Her exhausted body bore the marks of the life and death struggle, and no human figure could be seen anywhere in the hall or the main street she overlooked. Bloodstains were splattered everywhere on the floor, telling her it was anything but a dream. All right, everyone, that's the end of Chapter 1. Look forward to Chapter 2, which is called My Sweet Home. Hopefully that video is coming soon. I hope you're enjoying this reading of the Silent Hill 3 novelization, translated to English for the very first time, very recently. I hope you liked it. If you did, tell that like button you want to smash. Don't forget to subscribe. You stay you, I'll stay me, Droogie forever. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I will see you in the next video. Later.